I was 19 years old when the Reich came calling for me. It was the spring of 1940, and Germany already stood triumphant over Poland, Norway, Denmark, and Holland. At the time, I was just a farm boy from Thuringia, more comfortable with a plow than a rifle. But every young man was expected to serve, and when the letter arrived, there was no question of refusing. My father, who had fought in the last war and returned with a limp that never left him, said little. He just placed his hand on my shoulder as if to say, "This is your burden now." Before I continue, please like and subscribe if you want more content like this. I reported to the local garrison, one of dozens of nervous recruits in scratchy field grey uniforms. The sergeants barked orders from dawn to dusk. We learned to march, to clean rifles until they gleamed, to obey without hesitation. The Carabiner 98K became an extension of my body. At first, I fumbled with the bolt, the sling, the stripper clips. But after weeks of drills, the movements became second nature. Muscle memory burned into me. Sundays were our only reprieve. We would sit on wooden benches, smoking cheap cigarettes and trading stories. Some boys bragged about girls they had left behind. Others spoke of their families with voices too soft for the sergeants to hear. There was laughter, sometimes even songs, and for a moment, it felt almost like we were back in school. But it never lasted long. The war was always looming, and we knew it. My shooting came easily. Back home, I had hunted deer with my father's old rifle, stalking quietly through the woods. That patience and stillness, the rhythm of breath before a trigger squeeze, carried over into the training field. During target practice, while others struggled to keep their shots inside the circle, my bullets struck closer to the bullseye. The instructors noticed. One day, after a round of firing, a Feldwebel clapped me on the back and muttered, "You've got an eye, boy. You'll be needed." At the time, I didn't understand what he meant. I assumed every soldier was expected to shoot well. But a few weeks later, my name appeared on a list. Those chosen were to report for additional marksmanship testing. We were sent to a separate range on the edge of the camp. There, under the scrutiny of older NCOS, we shot at moving targets, practiced estimating distance, and learned to fire from hidden positions. It was different from the regular training, slower, quieter, more precise. While the others blasted away in bursts, we were told to wait, to breathe, to make one shot count. The instructors drilled into us that a single bullet, properly placed, was worth more than 100 fired in panic. I began to understand that this was something different, something apart from the mass of the army. When the invasion of France began in May 1940, our unit was still in training. We heard the news secondhand, through radios in the barracks and excited rumors from officers. Paris had fallen in just weeks. Some recruits cheered, swelling with pride at Germany's strength. Others, like me, felt only a tightening in the chest. If the war moved so quickly, where would it end? By autumn, we were sent eastward. Officially, we were reserves, stationed in Poland to secure the rear. In truth, we were simply being moved closer to where the next storm would break. In the small towns, we saw the aftermath of the campaign: ruined houses, burned fields, families staring with hollow eyes as our columns passed. Some men jeered at the Poles, but I could not bring myself to. Their silence was enough. It was during that posting that I first received a scoped rifle. The armorer handed me a Carabiner 98K fitted with a CF39 scope, its glass clean and gleaming. It felt heavier, more serious than the standard infantry weapon. When I raised it to my cheek and looked through the optic, the world shrank and sharpened. I could see details I had never noticed before. The stitching on a distant uniform, the flicker of movement in tall grass. It was as though the rifle granted me a new set of eyes. I spent hours on the range, learning to adjust for wind and distance, to control the tremor of breath. The instructors emphasized patience above all. "You are not a machine gun," one told us. "You are the scalpel. Wait for the right moment. Strike once and vanish." His words etched themselves into my mind. The others in my unit began to treat me differently. They joked about my eagle eyes, sometimes asking me to spot distant landmarks during marches. I didn't feel special, just burdened with a strange responsibility I couldn't yet define. I was still just a soldier, and in truth, I had not yet killed a man. That would come soon enough. By the end of 1940, our training complete, we were veterans in everything but name. The officers drilled us with maps and rumors. Everyone whispered of a great campaign to the east against the Soviet Union. The sergeants said little, but the stockpiling of supplies, the endless trainloads of men and machines heading east, told us all we needed to know. As that brutal winter settled over Poland, I sat with my rifle across my knees, polishing the scope with a scrap of cloth. The glass reflected my face, back at me. Young, gaunt, uncertain. I wondered what that face would look like a year from then. I did not yet know that I would soon measure time, not by seasons or months, but by the men I had watched through a crosshair. The war had only just begun for me. The official order came in February 1941. I was to attend a specialized course at a sniper training school outside Warsaw. A handful of us from the regiment were chosen, men the officers had noticed on the range. We boarded a rattling train and arrived at a camp hidden in pine woods, its barracks half buried in snow. It was unlike the loud parade grounds I had known. Here, everything was quieter, more deliberate. The instructors were veterans from the campaigns in Poland and France. They spoke little, but their eyes carried the weight of men who had seen too much. Each lesson was as much about patience as it was about marksmanship. We were taught to slow down our breathing, to feel the beat of our hearts, to press the trigger between pulses. "A sniper does not fire quickly," one of them said. "He fires correctly." Our rifles were all Carabiner 98 KS, each fitted with a ZF39 scope. They were checked and rechecked for accuracy. We learned to adjust the optics for distance, to account for bullet drop at 200, 400, even 800 meters. At first, my shots scattered, especially in strong winds. But after weeks of practice, I could hit a man-sized target at 600 meters with some confidence. The hardest lessons were not about shooting, but about disappearing. Camouflage became an art in itself. We practiced lying still for hours under branches, dirt smeared across our faces, until even the instructors walking past could not see us. We learned how light changed the look of fabric, how movement betrayed a position more than anything. A twitch of the hand, the flicker of a shadow. These could be as deadly as a bullet. There were days when we crawled for hours through mud and brush, advancing only meters at a time, while instructors scanned the field with binoculars. If they spotted us, we were ordered back to the start. At first, frustration gnawed at me, but slowly, I began to appreciate the rhythm of stillness, the strange patience it demanded. My world shrank to the pressure of earth against my chest, the sound of insects in the grass, the way a leaf trembled in the wind. Observation was another weapon. They drilled us to study everything: the outline of trees, the angle of shadows, the patterns of smoke from a distant fire. Each detail could reveal an enemy's position. We were given notebooks and told to sketch what we saw, not as artists, but as hunters marking trails. "You must know the land better than the men who live on it," the instructor said. At night, we learned stalking by moonlight. Moving silently became second nature. Boots were forbidden. We wrapped our feet in rags and crept like cats. Even the smallest sound seemed to echo in the frozen forest. I discovered that silence had a weight, pressing down on you until your own breath felt like thunder. The course also taught us about the psychology of killing. One instructor, an older man with a scar across his cheek, gathered us by the fire one evening. "Most of you have not yet killed," he said. "When you do, remember this: the man in your sights is not a man. He is a task. You must strip away his humanity, or else it will haunt you." His voice cracked as he said it, and I wondered what memories he carried. Despite the grim lessons, there were lighter moments. After long days, we would return to the barracks, boots muddy and uniforms torn, and collapse onto our bunks. Someone always managed to scrounge tobacco, and we would share it in silence, smoke curling toward the rafters. Sometimes a joke would ripple through the room about a clumsy recruit or about the terrible stew in the mess hall, and laughter would break the tension. For a little while, we were just young men again, not hunters in training. I grew close to a fellow trainee named Dieter, a mechanic from Hamburg. He was quick with a smile and quicker with his rifle. We spent evenings whispering about home, about what we might do if we survived this war. He dreamed of opening a garage after the fighting. I told him I wanted nothing more than to return to the farm, to the quiet rhythm of the fields. We made promises we half knew we would never keep. By May 1941, the course was nearly over. We were tested one final time, a mock hunt in the forest. Each of us was paired against another, assigned to stalk and kill our opponent with a blank cartridge before being discovered. For hours I crawled through damp undergrowth, belly pressed into the earth, eyes scanning for the faintest hint of movement. When I finally saw Dieter, half hidden behind a tree, my heart pounded as if it were real. I steadied my breathing, squeezed the trigger, and the blank cracked through the forest. His grin flashed when he realized he'd been beaten. "You'll make a fine sniper," he said. We received our certificates days later. The instructors shook our hands solemnly, as if passing on a burden rather than an honor. We were no longer just riflemen. We were something else, fewer in number, quieter in presence, but tasked with deadly precision. As we packed our gear, orders arrived. We were to rejoin our regiments for a new campaign. The officers no longer bothered with secrecy. The target was clear: the Soviet Union. Operation Barbarossa would begin soon. On the train eastward, my rifle rested across my knees, scope wrapped in cloth. Through the window, endless fields rolled past, dotted with villages and churches. I tried to picture the men I might see through the crosshairs soon. Farmers like my father, boys my own age, perhaps even men who dreamed of their own return home. The train rattled on, carrying us toward the frontier. We laughed, smoked, and traded stories, trying to mask the dread that gnawed at the edges of our hearts. For all the training, all the discipline, none of us truly knew what awaited us. I was no longer a farm boy. I was a sniper now, and the war was about to begin in earnest. On the morning of the 22nd of June 1941, we crossed the border into the Soviet Union. The air was still and heavy, the horizon lined with forests and villages that seemed half asleep. At dawn, the artillery began. The thunder of guns rolled for miles, shaking the earth beneath our boots. Columns of panzers roared past, dust rising like a storm. We, the infantry, marched behind them, rifles slung across our shoulders, hearts pounding with the knowledge that we were stepping into something vast and terrible. I remember the smell most vividly: diesel smoke, scorched powder, and the acrid stench of burning houses. Villagers watched us from doorways, faces pale, eyes wary. Some fled into the woods, clutching bundles of belongings. Others simply stood, resigned, as our grey columns passed. I kept my gaze forward, my fingers brushing the stock of my rifle for reassurance. My role as a sniper was clear: to move ahead of the company, to scout, to eliminate threats before they reached the others. The first days were chaotic, the Soviets retreating in disorder, their units smashed by surprise and speed. But even in retreat, danger lurked. Stray riflemen harassed us from tree lines. Machine guns rattled from barns or hillsides. These were the moments when men like me were called forward. The first time I fired at a living target came outside a village near Brest. Our platoon halted, pinned down by fire from a cluster of houses. Through my scope, I saw the flash of a Soviet rifle from an upstairs window. My breath slowed, the world narrowing to the crosshair. He was just a dark silhouette, but I could see the quick jerk of his hands as he reloaded. My finger tightened. The rifle bucked against my shoulder, and the figure crumpled backward. For a moment I felt nothing, only the mechanical satisfaction of a shot well placed. But as the others surged forward, cheering, I remained rooted. I had ended a life. My mind told me it was necessary, that it saved my comrades. Yet my stomach churned. That night, lying in the dirt, I could still see the shape collapsing through the glass. There was no time for reflection. The advance was relentless. Each day we marched deeper into the vastness of Russia, the maps stretching endlessly. The villages seemed poorer the further east we went. Wooden huts, barefoot children, old men glaring with quiet hatred. Sometimes women spat at us, though always from a safe distance. It was a reminder that no matter how easily we advanced, this land would never welcome us. As July bled into August, resistance stiffened. The Red Army, once thought broken, regrouped and fought fiercely. Near Minsk, we were tasked with clearing a patch of woodland where Soviet stragglers had set up ambushes. I crawled ahead alone, belly to the ground, every sense stretched thin. The forest was alive with sound, the rustle of leaves, the cry of birds, the distant crack of rifles. Through my scope, I spotted a Soviet soldier crouched behind a fallen log, scanning the path where our men would pass. His helmet gleamed faintly in the sun. I waited. breath steady. Patience. That was what the instructors had drilled into us. When his head rose just above the bark, I squeezed. He dropped silently, unseen by his comrades. A second man rushed to shake him awake, and I fired again. The ambush collapsed before it began. My company swept through, rifles barking, grenades exploding in the underbrush. When it was over, the forest was silent except for the groans of the wounded. My comrades clapped me on the back, calling me a savior, but their voices seemed distant. I couldn't forget the way the second man had reached for his fallen comrade, like a brother, before I ended him too. At night, we huddled around small fires, trying to chase away the damp cold. Dieter sat beside me, chewing on a crust of bread. "You think too much," he said softly, noticing the far-off look in my eyes. "It's them, or us. Remember that." He grinned, trying to lighten the mood. "Besides, with you around, I might actually survive this madness." I forced a laugh, but his words lingered. Them or us. Simple, brutal, unyielding. I repeated it to myself like a prayer whenever I raised the rifle again. By September, the campaign stretched towards Smolensk, and whispers of Moscow filled the ranks. We were exhausted, our boots worn thin, uniforms stiff with grime. But still, we pushed forward, caught between pride at our victories and dread at the endlessness of this land. The fields rolled on forever. The forests swallowed whole divisions, and still the Soviets fought. One morning, after weeks of marching, I climbed a ridge to scout ahead. Through my scope, I saw the sun rising over a distant village, its church steeple pierced against the sky. Smoke drifted from chimneys, and for a fleeting moment, it looked peaceful, untouched by war. I lowered the rifle, and the weight of it pressed into my lap. In that instant, I realized something. This war would not be swift, no matter what Berlin promised. The Soviets would not break easily, and men like me would be called again and again to do what most could not bear. The war had opened before me like an endless steppe, and I was just at the beginning of my hunt. The further east we pushed, the more the war changed. In the first weeks, victory had seemed effortless. Columns of prisoners, abandoned Soviet guns rusting in the sun, villages taken without a fight. But by October 1941, outside Vyazma, the mood had shifted. The Soviets had regrouped, their resistance stiffening into a wall of fire. For the first time, I felt the weight of the title sniper pressing on me like a stone. Orders came down to halt a Soviet counterattack threatening our flank. My platoon dug in along a shallow ridge, the earth damp and cold beneath our spades. I was told to take up a position ahead of the line, concealed among the trees, and pick off any Soviet officers or machine gunners. I crawled into place before dawn, wrapping myself in a cloak of burlap and leaves. The forest was still, dew clinging to every branch. Through my scope, I watched the mist drift over the fields where the enemy would come. My heart hammered, my breath fogged the glass, and I wiped it clean with a trembling thumb. The first Soviets appeared as shadows, moving cautiously through the haze. My crosshair settled on a man waving his arm, guiding the others forward. He was tall, his cap set differently than the rest, an officer perhaps. I hesitated. His face was clear in my scope, young and earnest, eyes searching the field ahead. I told myself what the instructors had drilled into us. He is not a man, he is a task. I exhaled and squeezed. The recoil jolted through me, the sound muffled by the crackle of rifles all along the ridge. In my scope, the officer pitched forward, his body jerking as if yanked by strings. The men behind him faltered, their lines stuttering. For a moment, the battle seemed to pause. Then chaos broke loose. Shouts, return fire, the thump of machine guns. I reloaded, hands steady now, and searched for another target. A Soviet machine gun crew scrambled into position behind a fallen tree. The gunner's hands fumbled with the belt. My reticle found the back of his head and another shot rang out. He collapsed across the weapon. His assistant tried to drag him clear, panic in his movements, and I cut him down too. It became mechanical after that. Spot, aim, squeeze. Men fell in jerks and spasms, their comrades stumbling over them. The air filled with smoke and the stink of powder. I felt detached, as though I were not part of the battle but an observer pulling strings from a distance. When the Soviets finally broke and withdrew, leaving their dead scattered across the field, I lay motionless in the undergrowth, the rifle cooling against my cheek. My ears rang, my shoulder ached, but I kept my gaze fixed through the glass. Some part of me was afraid that if I looked away, the faces of the fallen would rise before me. That night, back at camp, the officers congratulated me. 7 confirmed kills today, one of them said, clapping my back. Excellent work. You saved lives. The others nodded, raising tin cups of bitter coffee in my honor. I forced a smile, but my throat was tight. Later, as the fires burned low, I sat alone with Dieter. He had seen me shoot, had watched the men fall through my scope. You did what had to be done, he said quietly. Those machine gunners would have torn us apart. I nodded, but the words rang hollow. When I closed my eyes, I didn't see faceless enemies. I saw the officer's expression just before the bullet struck, the way the assistant gunner had tried to help his comrade. They were soldiers like us, caught in the same storm. The days blurred into one another. Each skirmish brought new targets, new kills. My rifle became both a shield and a curse. The men in my company began to rely on me, to call for me when danger loomed. They spoke of me with admiration, even envy, but I felt only the creeping numbness of repetition. Each trigger pull chipped something away inside me. There were light moments, small fragments of humanity that broke through the weight. Once, during a lull, we found ourselves billeted in a village abandoned by its people. A goat wandered into the square, bleating. The men laughed as they chased it clumsily, finally catching it and roasting it over a fire. For a few hours we ate like kings, grease running down our chins, jokes spilling as if we were back home. I laughed with them, but when the fire died down, the silence crept back. Winter came early that year. The ground froze hard as iron, and the cold bit through our coats. Snow muffled the battlefield, making every shot echo strange and hollow. The Soviets did not stop. They attacked in waves, their bodies blending into the white. I picked them off one by one, the red blooms on the snow stark and vivid. Sometimes, the sight of it made me feel sick, as though I'd painted a field with my own hands. One evening, after a long day of fighting, I found myself staring into the dark, rifle across my lap. My hands were steady, but my chest was heavy. I thought of home, the smell of fresh hay, the warmth of the hearth. Would I ever return as the same boy who had left? Or would the war grind me down into something unrecognizable? The fire crackled. Dieter hummed a tune under his breath. And for a fleeting moment, I felt almost human again. But when I closed my eyes, The faces returned, and I knew the war would never truly let me go. By the summer of 1942, my regiment was transferred south to join the assault on Sevastopol, the great Soviet fortress on the Black Sea. The campaign had already dragged on for months. The city clung stubbornly to its cliffs and bays, bristling with bunkers and heavy guns. Our commanders promised that one final push would bring it down. We believed them because we had no choice. The journey itself felt endless. Dusty roads clogged with supply wagons, endless columns of sweating men, the smell of horse manure and gasoline mixed into one sour cloud. When we finally glimpsed Sevastopol from the hills, the city seemed unreal. Smoke rising from shattered buildings, the sea beyond glittering as though mocking the destruction. Snipers were in constant demand here. The Soviets had dug themselves into trenches, bunkers, and tunnels, their machine guns covering every approach. Ordinary riflemen could not dislodge them without paying a terrible price. That was where men like me were sent forward to break their defenses piece by piece. The days blurred into a rhythm of stalking and firing. At dawn, I crept into ruined buildings or shallow pits, rifle nestled against sandbags. Through the scope, I scanned the enemy lines, searching for the flicker of movement, the glint of a helmet. Sometimes I waited hours for a single shot. My body grew used to the stillness, though the insects and heat gnawed at me. One morning, I spotted a Soviet machine gun nest hidden in rubble. Their guns spat bursts at our infantry, pinning them down. I lined up on the gunner, my fingers steady. When he rose to feed a new belt, I fired. He toppled backward. His assistant grabbed the weapon, and I fired again. By the time our men advanced, the nest was silent. The officers praised me, but each success weighed heavier. The Soviets never seemed to run out of men. For every soldier I felled, another took his place. It felt like trying to hold back the sea with bare hands. The siege was not all battle. There were nights of eerie quiet when the guns fell silent and the stars burned sharp above us. We would sit in shell holes, sharing the last crumbs of bread, whispering to keep our minds from collapsing under the silence. Dieter told stories of Hamburg, of the smell of the docks and the hum of machines in his father's shop. I spoke of the fields back home, of warm bread and the sound of birds at dawn. For a moment, we could pretend we were not killers, just boys dreaming of places far away. But the city always reminded us of what we were. Once, advancing through ruined streets, I found the body of a young Soviet soldier slumped against a wall, his rifle still in his lap. He could not have been older than 16. His eyes were open, staring at the sky. Beside him lay a small wooden carving of a bird, no bigger than my thumb. I pocketed it without thinking, and later, when I looked at it under the pale moonlight, I felt a chill. The boy had carried something fragile and beautiful into hell, and I had helped destroy it. Sevastopol fought with teeth bared until the end. The Soviets used snipers of their own, deadly and patient. More than once, I felt the whistle of a bullet pass too close. The earth explode in inches from my cheek. One afternoon, a comrade beside me fell with a hole through his forehead, blood spraying across my sleeve. I froze, heart pounding, certain my turn was next. Only luck kept me alive. After that, I never lifted my head without fear of unseen eyes watching. By late June, the final assault began. Massive guns, Dora and Karl, monstrous weapons that shook the earth, pounded the city day and night. The ground quivered as though in pain, buildings collapsing in clouds of dust. We advanced through shattered defenses, bayonets fixed, grenades clutched tight. The Soviets fought from cellar to cellar, refusing to yield. I remember crawling through a trench choked with smoke, my rifle clutched to my chest, ears ringing. A Soviet soldier lunged from the haze, bayonet flashing. Instinct pulled the trigger and he fell at my feet. I stared at him as he bled, his mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. For the first time, I killed not from a distance, but up close. And it was different. Raw, brutal, undeniable. When Sevastopol finally fell in early July, the city was a ruin, its defenders dead or captured. We marched through streets littered with corpses, the smell of rot thick in the air. Some men cheered, raising their rifles in triumph. Others simply trudged forward, eyes hollow. Victory felt empty. That night, sitting by the sea, I held the little wooden bird in my palm. The waves whispered against the rocks, indifferent to our triumph, indifferent to the dead. I thought of the boy who had carved it, of Dieter's laughter, of my father's hand on my shoulder the day I left home. I wondered how many more lives I would take before the war ended, and whether any part of me would survive to return home at all. By the autumn of 1942, I found myself bound for Stalingrad. Word had spread through the ranks long before we arrived that the city on the Volga was a nightmare, a place where men vanished into ruins and never returned. Even so, we marched east, dusty and weary, clinging to the hope that this would be the battle to end it all. The first glimpse of Stalingrad was like stepping into the mouth of hell. Smoke hung heavy in the air, thick with the stench of burning oil. Buildings were reduced to skeletons of brick and steel. The Volga shimmered in the distance, barges still ferrying Soviet reinforcements across under fire. Artillery thundered without pause, shaking rubble into the streets. For a sniper, Stalingrad was both a hunting ground and a graveyard. The city's ruins provided endless cover, endless vantage points. But the Soviets had snipers of their own, skilled and merciless, their patience equal to ours. The duel between us was silent, invisible, and deadly. My first weeks were a blur of fire and dust. Each day, I crept through shattered factories or half-collapsed apartments, searching for the faintest sign of movement. A shadow in a window, the glint of glass, a head rising for a moment too long. Each shot was a gamble. Fire too quickly, and you gave away your position. Wait too long, and you risked being spotted yourself. I remember one duel in particular. It began at dawn, in the ruins of a grain silo. Through my scope, I caught a glimpse of a Soviet helmet across the square. I froze, knowing he must have seen me as well. Hours passed. Neither of us moved, save for the slow rise and fall of our breath. The sun climbed, the flies gathered, and still we waited. By midday, the heat was unbearable. Sweat stung my eyes, but I dared not shift. Then, a flicker. His scope betrayed him. A brief sparkle of light. My finger squeezed the trigger, the shot cracking through the silence. Dust rose from his perch, and his body slumped forward. Relief flooded me, but it was hollow. I had outlasted him, but the exhaustion of waiting, of knowing death had stared back at me, lingered. The city ate away at us. Food was scarce, water scarcer. We lived like rats among rubble, gnawing on hard bread, warming ourselves with fires built from broken furniture. The Soviets attacked relentlessly at night, at dawn, in waves that seemed endless. Our officers barked about honor and duty, but in the ruins, survival became our only law. Dieter was still with me then. We shared a corner of a collapsed apartment, sandbags piled in the window. At night, we whispered to keep despair at bay. "When this is over," he said one evening, staring at the shattered ceiling above us, "I'll go home and never touch a rifle again. I'll build engines, mend cars, anything but this." I smiled in the darkness. "And I'll go back to the farm. I'll live in silence so deep, I'll forget the sound of gunfire." We both laughed softly, though neither of us believed it. The war had already claimed pieces of us we could never get back. The Soviets grew bolder with each passing week. The snipers seemed to multiply, their skill sharpening. Every step into the open felt like tempting fate. More than once, bullets cracked past my ear, splintering stone inches away. Each near miss left me shaken, my heart hammering so loud I thought the enemy might hear it. One day, while covering an assault near the Red October factory, I lost Dieter. He rose for a moment too long, shouting to the men below. A shot rang out, sharp and final. He fell beside me, a neat hole through his temple, blood spilling across the sandbags. I froze, disbelief pinning me in place. The world narrowed to the sound of my own breath, the sight of his lifeless eyes. I did not cry. I could not. I simply picked up my rifle, searched the opposite windows, and waited. Hours later, I found a Soviet sniper. He leaned from cover, too confident. My shot struck true, and he fell. But the victory was ashes in my mouth. I had avenged Dieter, but nothing could bring him back. The days after blurred into exhaustion. My hands trembled when I reloaded. My eyes ached from staring through the scope. Sleep came in fitful scraps, haunted by Dieter's smile, by the faces of men I had killed. Hunger gnawed at us. Cold seeped into our bones. And still the fighting raged on. By December, the city was a graveyard. Corpses froze in the streets, their uniforms stiff with frost. The Soviets had encircled us, cutting off supplies. We dug into the ruins, waiting for relief that never came. My body grew thin, my cheeks hollow, yet I still carried my rifle, still climbed into shattered buildings, still searched for targets through glass clouded by frost. Each shot felt heavier, as though the rifle itself resisted me. My vision blurred, my heart faltered. But I pressed on, because to stop was to die, and I was not ready for that. Not yet. In the ruins of Stalingrad, I learned what it meant to endure beyond endurance. Not to fight for victory, not even for survival, but simply because stopping was impossible. When I finally left the city, carried out half-conscious, after being wounded, I did not feel relief, only emptiness. Stalingrad had taken everything from me: comrades, strength, even the illusion of purpose. All that remained was exhaustion and the endless weight of memory. The winter of 1942-43 in Stalingrad was like no winter I had ever known. It was not just the cold, though the cold was merciless, gnawing into our marrow. It was the hunger, the ceaseless bombardment, the way despair hung heavier than the frost in the air. We were surrounded now, the Red Army closing a steel ring around the Sixth Army. Supplies no longer reached us, and every day we withered a little more. I had grown thin as a skeleton. My uniform hung loose. My hands trembled when I lifted my rifle. Yet I still crawled into ruined buildings. still scanned the streets through cracked glass, still searched for shadows that moved where none should. Each kill no longer felt like a victory, only a delay of the inevitable. It was in January 1943, during one of the last desperate German counterattacks, that fate finally caught me. Our company was ordered to hold a block of rubble near the tractor factory, a position the Soviets battered day and night. Shells fell constantly, collapsing walls, showering us in bricks and dust. The air was thick with smoke, every breath searing my lungs. I remember crouching behind a shattered wall, rifle braced, eyes stinging. Soviet infantry surged toward us, bayonets fixed, their shouts rising above the din. I fired until the bolt felt fused to my hand, each shot dropping a figure in the snow. My comrades shouted around me, the world a blur of muzzle flashes and explosions. Then the artillery struck. A shell landed close, so close the blast lifted me off my feet. I remember the sudden silence that followed, as though the world had been smothered. My ears rang with a high, piercing whine. When I tried to move, fire lanced through my side. I looked down and saw blood seeping through my tunic, dark and heavy. The pain hit then, sharp and merciless, each breath a struggle. Dust swirled above me, snowflakes melting on my face. For a moment, I thought it was the end, that I would bleed out in the ruins, just another nameless body among thousands. But strong hands gripped my shoulders. A voice shouted my name. Eric, the youngest in our squad, barely 18. His face was pale with terror as he dragged me across the rubble, bullets cracking overhead. I tried to tell him to leave me, to save himself, but the words came out as choked whispers. Still, he pulled, stumbling toward the rear, refusing to let go. We reached the cellar of a ruined building where a makeshift aid station had been set up. The stench inside was unbearable, a mix of blood, rot, and sweat. Wounded men lay sprawled on the floor, their moans echoing against the stone walls. A harried medic knelt beside me, ripping open my tunic. His hands pressed into the wound, and I screamed, the sound tearing out of me before I could stop it. "You're lucky," he muttered. "The shrapnel missed the lung, but you'll need to be moved, or you'll rot here." His words blurred as the darkness closed in. The days that followed drifted in and out of consciousness. Fever burned through me. Sometimes I woke to the sound of shells pounding above, dust falling from the ceiling. Other times, I opened my eyes to see the medic's weary face, his hands stained crimson, moving from one broken man to the next. I wondered how he still found the strength. At last, an order came to evacuate the worst cases by air. The Soviets' ring around us was tightening, but a handful of aircraft still managed to land on frozen strips and carry out the wounded. I was loaded onto a sled, dragged across the snow toward the airfield. The cold cut into me, every jolt sending fire through my ribs. Around me, other wounded groaned or lay silent, eyes glassy. When the aircraft finally lifted from the ground, I felt both relief and guilt. Relief to be leaving that frozen graveyard, guilt because I was abandoning comrades who would never escape. I thought of Dieter, buried somewhere in the ruins, and of Eric, who had dragged me to safety but stayed behind. Their faces pressed against my mind, heavier than the wound in my side. The flight was short, though it felt endless. We landed far from the front in the rear area field hospital. There, white walls and clean sheets greeted me like an alien world. The nurses spoke softly, their hands gentle, and the food, thin soup, but warm, felt like a miracle. I should have felt safe, but I did not. At night, I dreamed of Stalingrad, of ruined streets echoing with gunfire, of comrades frozen in the snow, of the silent eyes of the men I had killed. I woke drenched in sweat, clutching the sheets as though they were the rifle I had left behind. The doctors told me I would recover, though slowly. The wound was deep, but it would heal. "You are fortunate," one said. Fortunate. I wondered what fortune it was to leave friends behind in that city of death, to live while others were swallowed whole. For weeks, I lay in that hospital bed, watching snow fall through the window. My body mended, but my mind felt trapped in Stalingrad, as though part of me had never left. I told myself I should be grateful that I had survived when so many had not. But gratitude did not come. Only a heavy emptiness and the knowledge that the war was far from over. The hospital where I found myself was far from the front, tucked into the quiet of Bavaria. Snow lay deep on the roofs, and the world seemed untouched by the horror I had left behind. Inside, the ward smelled of antiseptic and boiled potatoes, a sharp contrast to the stench of blood and rot that had filled Stalingrad. White sheets, clean bandages, soft voices. At first, it felt like waking in another world altogether. The nurses moved like ghosts, efficient and kind, their footsteps muffled on the polished floors. They smiled at us, though their eyes betrayed the truth. They had seen too many shattered men pass through these halls. Some never left their beds. Others left with crutches, faces pale, spirits broken. I lay among them, my side wrapped in thick dressings, each breath a reminder of the shrapnel that had torn into me. Days bled into one another, marked only by the rattle of medicine carts and the distant chiming of church bells. The doctor said I was healing well, though weakness clung to me like a shadow. I could sit up after a week, shuffle to the window after two. From there, I watched snowflakes drift, delicate and silent. It was strange to think that while I stood in stillness, men in Stalingrad were starving, freezing, dying by the thousands. Letters trickled in, thin envelopes carrying fragments of the outside world. One was from my mother, her handwriting shaky, but steady enough to say she prayed for me daily. She wrote of the farm, of the harvest that had been poor, of neighbors gone off to war. Her words carried warmth, yet behind them I sensed worry, fear she tried to hide. Another letter came from Eric, the boy who had dragged me from the ruins. His scrawl was uneven, rushed. He wrote that he had been reassigned to another unit after Stalingrad collapsed, that most of the old company was gone. "You were lucky to get out," he said. "Don't waste it. Stay alive." Reading his words, guilt clawed at me. Why had I been spared while so many better men had perished? I wrote back clumsily, my hands shaking as I tried to find words. What comfort could I offer? What truth could I speak when the weight of the dead still pressed on my chest? I told him only that I was grateful, that I owed him a life, that I prayed he would find safety. The letter felt hollow, but it was all I could manage. As the weeks stretched on, doubt settled in. I had once believed in duty, in the idea that my skill as a sniper served a purpose, that each shot protected my comrades, that each kill had meaning. But lying in that hospital bed, I began to question. What had Stalingrad achieved? What had all the killing brought us but ruin? The city was gone, our army broken, tens of thousands lost. The men I had killed still haunted my nights, their faces swimming through fevered dreams. The doctors encouraged us to talk, to share our burdens with one another. Some did, voices cracking, as they spoke of wounds, of families, of futures they feared they would never see. Others stayed silent, staring at the ceiling, trapped in battles that would not let them go. I found myself somewhere between, sometimes able to laugh softly at a joke, sometimes staring at my hands as though they belonged to a stranger. There were lighter moments, rare but precious. Once, a nurse brought in a gramophone, and we listened to music crackle from the speaker. For a brief hour, the ward was filled not with groans, but with melody. One man even tried to dance, hobbling on his crutch as the others cheered. I laughed then, a real laugh, though it quickly faded into the silence that followed. At night, when the ward quieted and only the faint creak of the beating remained, I lay awake. I thought of Dieter, his grin, the way he had spoken of a garage in Hamburg he would never build. I thought of the boy in Sevastopol with the wooden bird, of the Soviet sniper I had outlasted in the grain silo, of the countless shadows I had ended without knowing their names. The weight of them pressed down on me until I felt I could not breathe. One evening, the doctor came with news. "Your recovery is going well," he said. "With more rest, you could be discharged soon, perhaps even sent home to convalesce." His words should have filled me with relief. Yet instead, I felt an emptiness. Home. What was home now? The farm, the fields, the quiet life I once dreamed of. It all seemed distant, unreachable. Could I return to it after everything I had seen, after everything I had done? The truth was, I no longer knew who I was without the rifle. War had shaped me, scarred me, hollowed me. The thought of going home felt both a blessing and a curse. I wanted it, desperately. But I feared it too, that I would not belong, that I would be a stranger among my own people. And yet deep down, I knew the war was not finished with me. The Reich was far from done. Rumors reached even the hospital, talk of new offensives, of Kursk, of battles still to come. My body was healing, but already orders loomed like shadows on the horizon. For now, I sat by the window, watching snow fall gently on the courtyard. The world outside looked so peaceful, so pure. But I knew that soon I would be called back into the storm. By the summer of 1943, my wound had healed enough that the doctors declared me fit for duty. I left the hospital with a stiff gait, the scar at my side tugging with every breath. The air outside smelled of cut grass and rain, so different from the ruin and smoke of Stalingrad that it felt almost unreal. Yet in my orders, stamped and signed, reality returned. I was to rejoin my regiment for Operation Citadel, the offensive at Kursk. I had dreamed, in the long nights of recovery, that perhaps I might be sent home permanently, my war finished. But the Reich needed every man now, especially those trained for specialized work. A sniper's eye could not be wasted, no matter how tired it had become. We moved by train, crammed into cattle cars, the air thick with sweat and tobacco. Among the new recruits around me, I felt old, though I was barely 22. Their faces were fresh, their eyes still bright with pride and expectation. They spoke of swift victory, of the glory to come. I said little, staring out at the endless Russian fields rolling past, remembering how quickly hope turned to ash. Kursk was unlike anything I had seen before. The battlefield stretched for miles, a labyrinth of trenches, bunkers, minefields, and barbed wire. The Soviets had prepared for months, waiting for us to come. Our commander spoke of decisive victory, of breaking the Red Army in one blow. But when I looked at the fortified ridges bristling with guns, I felt only dread. On July 5th, the offensive began. The sky filled with the roar of engines as our artillery thundered, shaking the earth. Panzers rolled forward in endless columns, the steel hides glinting in the sun. We followed, boots crunching the dry earth, rifles slung but ready. My orders were the same as ever. Find vantage points, eliminate enemy officers, machine gunners, and, if I was lucky, their snipers. The battle unfolded like a storm without end. Soviet guns answered ours, shells tearing into tanks and men alike. Aircraft screamed overhead, dropping bombs that turned earth to fire. The fields became a sea of smoke and craters, littered with twisted metal and broken bodies. As a sniper, I moved along the edges, crawling through wheat fields scorched by shell fire. My scope revealed glimpses of the enemy, a commander shouting orders, a gunner manning an anti-tank weapon, a sniper's glint on a far ridge. Each time I steadied my breath, pressed the trigger, and another figure fell. It was mechanical, almost detached. Yet inside, each shot added to the heavy ledger I carried. One duel nearly ended me. I had taken position in a shell crater, scanning the lines, when I felt it, the prickle at the back of my neck, the certainty of unseen eyes. I froze, lowering my head just as a bullet cracked past, sending dirt spraying. My heart pounded. I crawled inch by inch, circling through the wreckage, searching. At last, I spotted him, a Soviet sniper hidden in a haystack, his barrel just visible. For long minutes, we watched each other, the world shrinking to two rifles and the silence between. I knew the first man to flinch would die. Sweat stung my eyes, my scar throbbed, my arms ached from holding still. Finally, he shifted, the faintest movement. My shot came quick, sharp, final. The haystack twitched, then was still. I lay there shaking, not from cold, but from the knowledge of how close I had been to death. The battle raged on for days. Our panzers clashed with Soviet armor in fields that became graveyards of steel. I saw tigers and panthers burn, their crews screaming inside. I watched comrades torn apart by Katyusha rockets, their cries drowned by the howl of steel. No matter how many Soviets we killed, more came. It was as if the earth itself birthed them endlessly. At night, we huddled in trenches, the ground trembling beneath distant bombardments. The young recruits no longer spoke of glory. Their faces were gray with exhaustion, their eyes hollow. We chewed on dry bread, drank water thick with mud, and prayed for dawn that brought no relief. One evening, as the sun sank red over the battlefield, I thought of Dieter, of his promise to open a garage after the war. I thought of Eric, perhaps still alive somewhere in this vast hell. And I thought of myself, scarred, tired, still here. Why me and not them? The question gnawed at me without answer. By mid-July, the offensive faltered. Our thrust had been blunted, our tanks destroyed in the hundreds. Rumors spread quickly. The Allies had landed in Sicily. The Reich was on the defensive now. Kursk was not our triumph. It was the turning tide. We dug in, but deep down we knew the truth. The war was slipping from our grasp. I remained with my rifle, still doing the work expected of me, but something inside had shifted. I no longer believed in victory. I fought only to survive, to keep the man beside me alive for one more day. When I raised my scope, and saw a Soviet face in the crosshairs, I no longer told myself he was just a task. I knew he was a man, just like me, just as tired, just as trapped. And yet, I still pulled the trigger. Because if I did not, he would. The wheat fields of Kursk burned around us, the sky filled with smoke, the ground littered with the dead. And in that fire, I felt the war turning, dragging us all down with it.